Also not the best for the state of Nevada because we desperately need these talented people. We are working with the Office of New Americans here in Nevada as much as possible. If you're not familiar with that office, reach out. We can provide contact information, and keep you posted as far as the progress that we make with that office. So anyway, welcome, and we're very glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I appreciate that. And we do have access to a lot of resources, which I'll touch on later on today. So, with that, we're going to move on to our training goals for today. And on the next slide, we'll get to see that again, we're going to be defining who are internationally trained professionals, identify the barriers and challenges that they face and that they need to overcome in order to be integrated into American workforce. We're going to recognize those ways to support them through their academic and economic inclusion for economic mobility. So before we begin, I'd like to ask you to please share in the chat what is one burning question you have regarding ITP learners that you would like to know? What's one thing you would like to know and maybe get addressed today? Let me go ahead and put that in the chat. What's your burning question you have about internationally trained professionals? And if you're here thinking, I don't know what an internationally trained professional is, you are in the right spot. So as you post those questions, we're going to go ahead and move on. And I just want to ensure that I do address most, if not all of those questions, if it's part of the topic or content that we're going to cover today. So let's talk about internationally trained professionals. And we do have a poll to ask you, what is an internationally trained professional? And Josie's going to share on the next slide and also a poll that you can go ahead and respond to. What is an internationally trained professional? It's a person born outside the US who has, and then you have your menu options there for you. You can select multiple answers, and I'll go on mute for a brief moment to allow you to read. Okay, I do see lots of folks are responding already. We're a little bit above the halfway point. I'd like to see most of everyone, if not everyone, to please respond. Um, so who are these internationally trained professionals? I do see right now that they earned a degree. That's in the lead. Let's see, a couple of more folks. Okay, Josie, can you go ahead and share those results? And it looks like many of you responded that they earned a degree or they earned a license or certification. Close to that is they earned college or university credit. So we will be talking about how that is defined. So thank you so much for that first poll. And thank you for your responses in the chat. I am looking at those questions that you posted. Now let's go on to our second poll. And now that you've answered who you think an internationally trained professional is, in what ways can adult education and its partners best address the needs of internationally trained professionals? Again, you can select multiple answers, and I'll go on mute for a moment. Okay. So, oh, we had more participation in this poll. So, Josie, can you go ahead and share those results, please? Thank you. And I do see that 100%, all of you agree that What this would entail is offering specialized classes or services for internationally trained professionals. And you were pretty much neck and neck with all the other responses, apart from offering high school equivalency. And that makes my heart smile that it was not 100%. But yes, offering the English as a foreign language, language classes, IET classes, and citizenship classes. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing those and continue our um, with our slideshow. Josie, if you could please go to the next slide. Thank you. So the persons that we are focusing on today come with many naming variations. As you can see on your slide, we have college degreed outside the US on the upper left-hand corner. We have skilled immigrant and refugee, degreed foreigner, foreign professional, foreign trained individual, ESL professional, non-native professional, highly skilled foreign national. So many to choose from. But these all pretty much refer to the same individual. So no matter what you've read in the past or heard in the past, today we are going to be focusing on the same individual. For today's purposes, we're going to refer to them as internationally trained professionals. Early accounts refer to them as skilled immigrants and refugees. In fact, many research articles refer to them as such. But now there has been a shift towards internationally trained professionals. And throughout the session, I'll refer to them as ITPs, just for short. But I do want to go over the definition. And World Education Services, known as WES, they're the lead in this topic. They've been doing this work for over 50 years, and they define internationally trained professionals as persons who are 25 years of age or older who are born outside of the United States, and they are college educated with at least a 4-year education, meaning they have a bachelor's, a master's, professional, or some type of doctoral degree, and they are in a low skilled job or they are unemployed. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, this is their definition. Later on, I'm going to share what the WIOA definition is, and this is from our federal guidance. So when you consider all these naming conventions, why do you think the current term is internationally trained professionals? So compare that to what you see on the screen, and you can post that in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to unmute. Why do you think the current term is internationally trained professionals? And I put the abbreviated form in the chat. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm asking for your opinion. Why do you think? Why do we no longer call them foreign trained or foreign professional or degreed foreigner, foreign national? Margaret says more politically correct than foreign or refugee. Rain adds it eliminates the concept of foreign, which implies other. I'm trying to see what other responses we get. Thank you so much for posting. And shares, is it all tied to their legal status? Good question. Jackson says foreign might have negative connotations or the US UK English centric naming conventions. Ariana adds foreign is equivalent to strange or outsider. So thank you so much for posting those responses, and you hit it right on the money. Foreign signifies strange and unfamiliar. It also signifies other, and or it means doesn't belong, depending on how you use the term. So when you hear the term foreign, automatically what may come to mind is that they don't belong. They're not from here. They're that other type of people or persons. And so this term can be used to describe things, but not people. We could say, oh, that table is foreign it was made in a foreign country. But when it comes to people, we don't use the term foreigner or foreign, and that's something that we're trying to, I say we collectively, but it's not, I had nothing to do with it. It's more in terms of just the landscape of where we are in terms of our society today. So you can see that as adult educators, when we are trying to leverage support from our partner network, how critical a naming convention can be, because when you're trying to garner that support, and how you call these individuals can make an automatic assumption of, oh, you want us to serve those other people. And so that's why we're using the term internationally trained professional. So later we will explore some of these barriers that exist for ITPs individuals. Some are institutional barriers, meaning that they are ingrained as part of a system. So how you classify a person can have deep implications in terms of service delivery down the road. And I see here, Stephanie, you added, it changes the perception and applies asset mindset. That's right, right? That asset deficit. So thank you so much for sharing that. Can we go to our next slide, please, Josie? So we're now going to go into brain waste. It's a term that's connected to internationally trained professionals. Use your virtual thumbs up or down to indicate if you are familiar with this term. Maybe you've heard it, you might not know what it is, maybe you've never heard it. Give me a thumbs up or down if you've heard it. So I have 3 thumbs up. Okay. A down. Good. And I'm trying to get a sense of where we're at, folks. So be honest and just share, yes, you know what it means, or no, you've never heard it. We have a couple of shy folks. That's okay. Okay. So some yeses and some nos. Good. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. Not yet. I like that answer. Yes, not yet. Okay. And Margaret says, yes, you know what it means, but never heard it described this way. Perfect. So brain waste is something that internationally trained professionals typically suffer from, and it refers to the skill underutilization, meaning that their university credits and or degrees are not recognized in the US academic institutions or workforce. As a result, internationally trained professionals need to find jobs that only require a high school diploma or a high school equivalency to make ends meet. And so that's the challenge. That is what we call brain waste. When you have earned, you've already studied at a college or university, and you have the skill set, you have the workforce experience, you have the academic background, and you're relegated to work in an industry or in an occupation that requires far less. That is what we refer to with brain waste. So let's look at the impact of brain waste and see how it affects our economy, our communities, and the workforce. In the United States, there are a little over now 2 million adult internationally trained professionals that are residing in the US. 2 million. Can you believe that? And that means that uh, uh, these ITPs that exist in the United States, they're not working, or they're working in a position that requires only a high school diploma. Okay. This means that 1 in 4 immigrants that exist in the US are college educated and are suffering from brain waste. 1 in 4. And that's what that image represents on your screen. What you may not know, and thank you, Josie, she's posting the links as to where I gathered this information from. I was really curious to see what this looked like in Nevada because, you know, this is what we're focusing. And it's more than 86,000 for the state of Nevada. And oftentimes when I work with other organizations or entities, I do this work on my off time. This is what I do on my volunteer basis. And I advise on how to serve internationally trained professionals. So I'm always looking at data. And people will tell me, well, they don't exist here. They don't live here. That's why we don't serve them. There's no need. And when you look at numbers, like what you see on the screen, it's pretty much screaming at us, right? They are here, and those are the ones that are reported because there are many more that go um, unreported or underreported for political reasons, for immigration reasons, for fear or lack of knowledge. And so those numbers are even higher. So this unemployment occurs when a person who is actively searching for employment is unable to find work. That we know. But what is interesting, a sad fact, in fact, is that ITP learners have this university or college background, but they are unable to secure employment in the US that is equivalent to or aligned to the work that they've done before or to the area that they had studied. So that underemployment refers to work by the highly skilled in a low skill job. And that is at jobs that require, again, that moderate on the job training, such as home health aides, personal care aides, maids, housekeepers, rideshare drivers, cashiers, maintenance crew, landscapers. And these occupations, again, possibly require maybe a high school diploma or less. In fact, every single time I travel, I always encounter, I like to chat with folks. Um, and when I get a Lyft or an Uber or I go into my hotel, people that I encounter, I start chatting and hey, and how's your day? And where are you from? And are you from this, are you from Las Vegas? Are you from Reno? And as we start chatting, 9 out of 10 times they'll share, well, I was born in Panama and I'm a doctor, but I'm doing this to make ends meet. And it just breaks my heart because I know that there's a path. And the thing is, they don't know that there's a path. And so I'm sure that you have encountered ITP learners as well that come into your classrooms, into your programs. And as you know, these individuals are unaware of the services that are available to them. One other interesting note is that when you compare the statistics of brainwaves also refers to native born who are Americans, right? People who are born in the US who are also university degreed and they are underemployed and unemployed. But when you compare ITPs to Native Americans, the numbers are 2 times higher for those that have a STEM background that are unemployed. And it's just astonishing to find out that there's such a labor gap, and yet we have these people that are unemployed. So, Josie, if we can go to the next slide, please. And so, what is the impact? What happens when we have this brain waste? What does it look like across a national landscape? The underemployment of immigrant college graduates results in tens of billions of dollars that go unearned and as well as possible taxes that can be collected on an annual basis, which in turn affects our economy at every level because it lowers productivity and consumer demand. What you see on your screen on the left-hand side is the amount that ITP learners are losing out on. When you have an ITP learner who is pushing carts at a grocery store or who is working at a construction site, but they are a nurse or an engineer, that's lost income because they have that skill base. Not only do they have the skills, but they also they're at the very minimum bicultural because they bring that cultural knowledge from another country and they're learning the US systems. And so when they serve others, they can provide that forward. And when they occupy a position that can be taken by, a student that has a GED or a high school diploma, that ITP learner is holding that spot that the person with the GED or a high school diploma cannot satisfy because it's already taken. So you're occupying that position. What also happens is that by the ITP learners not being able to earn their income at the level or the career that they have prepared for, that also means that there's loss in taxes. $10 billion. That's B with a billion, right? That can go to improving roads, bettering our schools, developing parks, and better transportation and transit opportunities. But we don't capitalize on that again because of brain waste. And so, given that the skills and education degrade over time, if not, if you don't put it to productive use, that brain waste can have that long-term detrimental effect on those who are born outside the US. Highly skilled immigrants who cannot fully utilize their skills are less likely to earn family sustaining wages and achieve financial stability for themselves and for their families. Any questions so far? We're good? I'm looking at the chat. Okay. So let's go on to our next slide. Let's focus on some of the barriers that exist for our ITPs. What you see on your screen is just a number of the barriers that exist. There are many more, but the primary ones are listed here. Many immigrants and refugees, they make up 17% of the US labor force, and nearly half of them recently arrived as immigrants and refugees. They hold a bachelor's or at least higher. What they encounter is that while they sign up for English classes, those English classes do not prepare them for the contextualized technical knowledge that they need to be able to reestablish the career or at least the career pathway that they had once studied for. They also have difficulty in being able to find the workforce training that is customized for their needs. Oftentimes, the workforce training is catered to individuals who have maybe a ninth grade reading or above. These are individuals who have the study skills. They know how to research. They have that technical writing background, and they know how to be able to multitask. And so when they are placed in a workforce training class that is meant for maybe out of school youth or adult learners who maybe stopped out of high school, you can see that there is that discrepancy in the type of learner and how that instruction is customized for those with higher needs for skill building. And while ITP learners do need improvement on their skill sets, they have different needs than other adult learners. And so they suffer in trying to identify that workforce development training that is customized for individuals who already know how to study, who understand context clues and main idea and how to study for vocabulary. They need to know the path in which how to form that sentence structure so that they can communicate with their employer. That's exactly what they're looking for. One of the other issues that they're struggling with is a recognition of their international credentials. And this is a question that comes up all the time about where they can get their credentials evaluated. And the most important thing to know is you have to start with the end in mind. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the recognition of international credentials is difficult because there is no uniform platform across the US. What might be accepted in one state is not accepted in another, even within its own state. Let's say in terms of education, because that's the field that we are all in. If one institution recognizes one type of credential, another's will not. Also, when you have them evaluated, every institution will only accept a particular type of evaluation from a particular entity. And so it becomes challenging because this is not information that is out at the forefront. This is not information that is communicated to adult educators or to ITP learners. It is something that you need to discover on your own. I did a little bit of research in Texas on trying to find the credential evaluation requirements for lawyers in Texas. And it took me about 120 hours to research 10 universities on what their requirements are. And I can read in English. I have the digital skill sets. I have a good understanding of how to navigate a university website. It took me 120 hours. How long would it take an ITP learner who has not mastered the English language, who is unfamiliar with the American education system? And so those are the challenges that we speak of, those institutional challenges that exist. Then we have the development of social capital, and I see that question in the chat, Margaret. Oftentimes, these ITP individuals consider that they come from another country. They've left most, if not everything, behind families, friends, also their contacts, their colleagues. When we are looking for employment, we have our references that we can fall back on. Um, these ITP individuals do not. They don't know where to start. If you want to be an educator, who do you talk to? In Texas, they have the Texas Education Agency if you want to be an educator. But how would you know that? How would you know where to look for that information? And there's several organizations or associations like the Bar Association, the Nursing Association, and that in many countries, those organizations do not exist. So the development of that social capital, being able to network and develop their network is something that is sorely needed that adult educators can consider in how to satisfy. There's also the navigation of US systems. We have the mindset of the Western philosophy in terms of how things are done, right? You go to elementary school, then you have middle school or junior high school, then you have high school, you go to college maybe, and if not college, you go to the university, you get a bachelor's and a master's and a doctorate. That's standard US education system, but that's not the same in other countries. And so when we are, if we are employers, we're asking for, where's your high school diploma? Where's your bachelor's degree? And again, these ITP individuals may not understand what is being asked because in their country it's called something else and they don't know what the equivalent is. And it also happens at intake for our adult education programs. Then we have overcoming employer bias, from having an accent to looking differently to maybe posting, not posting, I'm thinking of online, of maybe adding information on your application or in your interview that is not typically shared because it is something that is the norm in their country. And you might have seen this already in your classrooms from other ELLs, English language learners in your class, but this is especially true for ITP learners because they might either overshare in some areas and undershare in others, resulting in employer bias. And so these adult learners need to know how to be able to advocate for themselves and be aware of what can be asked of them and what cannot. Then there are those wraparound services that we all know are crucial to any type of learner, not just ITP learners, but again, access to transportation, childcare, but those wraparound services are extended beyond the norm because they're needing services in terms of paying for those credential evaluations, being informed of what that process looks like and what the career pathway journey will look like is part of those wraparound services that they need. They also need that advocacy and connections to immigrant services, maybe citizenship services, being able to expand their network to employers and industries that is more apt for what they need compared to our standard adult learner. Of course, I'm making generalizations. I know, don't throw tomatoes at me. But for the most part, this is what the barriers that ITPs learners face. In addition to this, they might have barriers such as access to identification. If they come from a torn country, if they are asylum seekers, they might not have any documents whatsoever. So what can we do for them? Maybe their legal status is an issue or an area of concern. And so, how do we manage that, especially if we are WIOA funded? What does that look like? You know, can we serve undocumented persons? Can we serve people who reside in Nevada? Who are ITPs? What does the law say about that? So, those are all questions to consider. So let's move on. And Margaret, did I answer your question about social capital? Great. Okay. So let's move on to WIOA. I mentioned that. And what does WIOA say in terms of what services we can provide? So on the next slide, we're going to focus on what that definition is. I'm not going to read the entire definition, but it does speak to that area highlighted in orange or in bold in the middle of the screen, talking about professionals with degrees and credentials in their native countries. I had provided the West definition earlier, speaking about individuals who have a 4-year degree, whether it's a bachelor's, master's, etc. WIOA defines it differently. It doesn't say the number of years and the type of degree that you have. It's professionals with a degree, so that's one piece. And it's professionals with credentials. What does that look like? Well, a credential could be college credits, university credits, could be a licensure, it could be a title. There are many others that could satisfy that component, and how it is defined within your state is really that local discretion. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of what it could be, other than it's more expansive than the 4-year degree. So it can be people that don't have a degree that can be served as ITP learners within WIOA guidance. And within that definition, you also see what those activities or the service delivery looks like, providing that language support, right? Being providing them with the skill set so that they can navigate as citizens within the U.S. as to be effective parents and workers. And it talks about embedding that instruction to focus on the literacy and the language acquisition. And it may also include that workforce training that could be IET. So now let's look into what this looks like at our state and local level. And we're going to spend some time in this area looking at these 4 areas. On the left-hand side, you see that we have an area for outreach. We have the outreach. Going to the right, we have intake and orientation. Then we have instruction and support services. This does not encompass everything. I did not include professional development because in order to be able to do your job and function effectively in your role, you need to know what you're supposed to do and how you do it and how to measure if you're doing it well. And so that requires professional development or technical assistance. So that is not listed. State policies is not listed. But what I did include were some of the general areas that we are familiar with. And so under outreach, we're going to be looking at what we could do to address some of those barriers that we saw early on. And one of the items is when we advertise for our programs is who are we advertising to? Are we advertising general English language classes for anyone, or are we trying to draw in these ITP learners? And so what some programs and other areas do is they offer ESL classes that are customized for ITP learners. And I'm going to ask for you to post in the chat or unmute if any of you currently offer any type of customized advertisement for ITPs. Or maybe you're considering starting to do that. I'm looking over here because that's where y'all are. It's a shy bunch. I get it. Okay. So Jackson says no, not that he's aware of. Thank you so much for sharing. And so then that's something to consider, right? We have our classes for our GED or high school equivalency classes that we specifically market or advertise for, right? This is who it's for, this is what we do, and it's for those GED individuals. We have classes perhaps for citizenship, and we're targeting that specific population. The same thing for IETs, but for ITPs, what often happens is we place them in a class thinking that they'll be able um, to be successful, but because the instruction is not customized for them, and because the advertisement is not customized for them, the ITP learner thinks, well, I need to be in a GED class because I'm going to start all over again, right? They don't know that about credential evaluations. And those are areas that can be addressed during that advertisement of their programs. Another thing that can be considered is expansion of your partner network. Being able to involve your partners in the services that they can provide for ITP learners. Of course, this is not an easy task, but is well worth the effort. I'm getting a little tongue-tied here, sorry. It is well worth the effort because then whatever services that your partners can provide for ITPs, whether it's mentorship, maybe on-site shadowing, consultation of interviewing techniques, whatever it is that you can negotiate with that partner, then you can advertise that as part of the class for ITP learners. And so you have to begin with that background work, of course, prior to doing that advertisement. Then, of course, you have that industry integration. You can pair up with an employer, not necessarily to hire your ITPs, which would be wonderful if you could secure that possibility or that opportunity. But more often than not, you can seek an employer so that they can offer some type of guidance to be able to navigate the workforce system, especially in terms of maybe interviewing or job keeping skills or how to work up the career ladder within a specific industry. When I was at a provider site, we would bring in different folks from different industries. And when I would go to the doctor, I would say, oh, so where'd you go to school? Oh, I went to school in Costa Rica. And I'm like, really? And hey, would you ever consider talking at a school? And that's how I would just randomly talk to strangers and then bring them into the classroom to talk to the ITP learners. And I got to tell you folks, all it takes is one time and they're hooked. They'll come back again because they find it very useful and they see how meaningful that engagement is. So that's part of the outreach aspect. And I see, Gail, that you added, yes, that you want to share about your community available resources. Thank you for posting that. Then we talk about our intake and our orientation. And that first piece is talking about the validity of questions. Remember early on, I mentioned that uh, we have that Western mindset of our educational system, and rightly so. I mean, we work in this, we went through that path ourselves. So it would be difficult for us to think in another country's terms. And so oftentimes in our intake process, we might not be asking the questions that provide us the answers that we're looking for to identify ITP individuals. So what do those questions look like? And when we ask our individuals as they're coming in for that application to register for classes, If we ask them, do you have a degree? Do you have a high school diploma? Did you go to college? Those kinds of questions might get lost in translation, literally, because college in some countries means high school. So they're going to say, yes, I have college, but in reality, they're thinking high school. Some countries, they call their diplomas degrees. So again, you're going to get that false affirmative. And so we have to be careful and be more reflective with our questions. And some of the questions to consider would be, what is the highest requirement for education in your home country? In the US, that would be high school, right? That's compulsory. But what is beyond that? And then you could have that conversation. Okay, and so after you've completed those 8 years of education, what happens next? Well, then we have the option to go to technical school, but not everybody goes because you have to pay. And then you're thinking, well, maybe that's like a college, or maybe it's like a technical school that's like a proprietary, and you get additional information. You also ask if they have access to their documents. If they have access to their documents, you might be able to maybe read it depending on the language that it's in. Sometimes it has a course analysis and it gives you better insight to know how you're going to place that learner along the classes that you have offered in your program. You definitely, most definitely, want to inform your participant if they're considering taking GED classes. Ensure that they're making an informed decision about what that entails, because they are essentially going to replace their international credential for an American one that has much less value than their international one. So pursuing a high school equivalency might be great for a person who did not finish secondary, but for an individual who completed secondary and possibly had post-secondary credits, that might be a detriment. And so explaining to the individual about those career choices and what are the implications of those choices, time, cost, effort, it does require a lengthy discussion. This is not your typical intake process, but it is necessary in order to ensure that they are set forth on the appropriate or correct career plan. So making that informed decision. I once had an individual that we were in a graduation ceremony, and as I shook his hand as he crossed the stage, he had just earned his Spanish GED, and as he shook my hand, he said, "Ms. Moya, I want to talk to you afterwards because I have a degree as a federal lawyer in my country, and I want you to tell me how I can resume that career path." My heart sank. I just finished congratulating him for earning a high school diploma, never knowing he had a degree in Mexico as a federal prosecutor. And I wish I would have known earlier. And apparently, I didn't ask the right questions at the time. And it's not to say that you can no longer uh, share those credentials. It just makes it difficult explaining why you have a high school diploma when you also have a degree in another country. And it's just time and effort that is unnecessary, so long as the participant is well informed of those implications. So again, those validity of questions, but you can't ask those tough questions unless you establish some type of relationship. And folks, I've been at intake and I've spent many hours, and it's like, oh my gosh, you see the rows of people lined up and you're thinking, okay, I need 20 more people. That's going to be another 2, 3 more hours. I know what it's like, but we need to be aware of our affect and how we are responding to these individuals, because they have absolutely no reason to share their personal lives with us. I lived in a border community, and being that Nevada is like the mecca of several individuals from many countries, I would imagine that there are some similarities in terms of why people reside in our communities. And where I was, they were escaping their countries. Many of them were asylum seekers. Many of them were trying to escape the drug cartel. I'm not saying that's the same for Nevada. And so they were hesitant in trying to share this information that they had a degree because they we live in a border community and they didn't know what that would mean. Um, Again, in their country, they don't trust their government. So why would they trust us? They don't know who funds us. They don't know who we report to. They're worried about what type of support might affect their children based on what they share. And so, how do you establish that connection the first moment that you connect? And it goes back to that advertisement, having posters or having some type of written communication indicating these are the services that we provide exclusively to ITP individuals. If they see that write up posted somewhere or on social media on your website, then they already have a sense of, let me look at this a little further. Let me research, let me investigate. And it lends itself to building that trust. And of course, part of that intake and orientation is once you are able to ask those questions that yield the right answers for you to make a decision, you can set them on that appropriate career pathway, ensuring that it's a success for your program and it's a success for your learner. Because if you place that individual in a standard ELL class, in a GED class, it's going to be tough for them to demonstrate an MSG, a measurable skill gain. Why? Because they're going to find out that that class does not align to their needs. And so you'll end up losing that student, not because the instruction wasn't great, it just wasn't aligned to what they needed. Then we go into instruction, which I mentioned a little earlier, and we mentioned BICS and CALP, and I apologize for putting the acronyms. And I don't remember. I know it's basic. I'm going to have to look it up. But BICS refers to the type of language, and I'm sure Marian Thatcher could probably share the difference. But BICS refers to the type of English that learners need for social engagement, right? Water cooler knowledge. Oh, I'm dating myself. We don't have water cooler conversations anymore. But the kind of information you have, like when you're texting or when you're saying, hey, good morning, how was your day? How was your weekend? How are your kids? What did you do yesterday? That type of information is what learners need to know, because once they have a job, they need to be able to keep that job. They need to be able to engage with other colleagues so that they can share that communication. And so they have to develop that language skill set. The others is CALP, and CALP refers to the technical language that the learners need for their specific occupation or industry. So if these are individuals who were in a health career, then that ELL class would focus on the health magnet curriculum that is necessary, rather than holidays and recipes. And, I'm not saying that's what you do, but you want to deviate and focus more on that technical language. So again, the social language as well as the technical language is what they would need. Then that instruction, one of the best practices that was also discovered is being informed of American systems. Um, Again, the educational pathway is one thing that I had mentioned before. They also have to know, in the United States, what is really surprising to most is that we have a lot of free services. There's a lot of organizations that are nonprofit, that they help individuals, whether it's a food pantry, a clothing pantry, transportation. There's some low cost services, maybe for legal services or medical attention. And they don't know this. They don't know about 911. They're afraid if they call the ambulance, they're going to get deported or they're going to be billed. And it's those things that we take for granted. And so being aware of that Americana, those systems, helps them be more successful. And of course, being knowledgeable of their industry pathways and occupations. Now, I am not saying that as an adult educator, you need to know the pathway to be a doctor or to be a lawyer or an engineer or a dentist, but we serve as guideposts. I don't know. but this website does. I don't know, but this person does, or that agency does, or this organization. And we need to be like that one-stop shop for those ITP individuals because they've already exhausted all other options and they come to us seeking that information. And so in your classes, how do you handle individuals that have a multitude of different backgrounds all in one class? And you handle it in terms of self-directed learning, where the individuals are researching their career path and you're guiding that instruction, providing that contextualized instruction on how to engage with others, how to research, how to resolve conflict resolution, addressing those teaching skills that matter or those employability skills, those skill sets that they will need in any industry, not just that specialized one. Then we go into support services. And again, we focus on how do we engage that individual, ensuring that they will trust us, ensuring that we have that relationship where they will be forthcoming because they're going to be sharing documents with you. They're going to be sharing the reason why they left their country, possibly the type of industry that they worked in, what their occupation entailed, what the day-to-day life was like. And so that might fall on a person if there's like a career navigator or career advisor, a success coach. Again, I don't know if this exists in your program, but whoever it is that holds all the pieces together, it might be the instructor. You really need a person that will be able, who has that approachability to listen and to also be able to understand what is not said, the unspoken. Because again, these ITP learners will hold back on some of the information, not knowing whether or not what's going to happen with that information moving forward if it's shared. We spoke about social capital. What does that look like? Building a community within your own school is the best way to build social capital. Maybe having a WhatsApp group chat, maybe having your own LinkedIn group, your own Facebook group, and connecting them to industry partners. Maybe you have your medical magnet and you have your construction trades magnet and you have your engineering magnet and such. You have one for accounting. And so you pair them up with people or teach them how to follow certain industries so that they could learn and observe what those communications look like. And you can have pseudo mock-ups on postings that they might do and how to develop professional emails for that specific industry partner. Then we go into the credential evaluations and translations, and I know you're going to have questions on that. I have a specific slide just for that because it's like I can hear you already. But definitely considering how that support service will be provided, if it's provided at your program or through a partner. Who pays for it? When does an individual have to get this process done? Do they have to get the process done? Do they get it translated or evaluated? Do they do both? And those are the kinds of questions that, as an educator or adult education staff member, needs to identify to support the ITP individual. And then, of course, when this individual left their country, they lost their identity. They're no longer that accountant. They're no longer a teacher. They're no longer a dentist. And now they are a restaurant worker or a landscaper, an Uber driver. And it does something. It does something to you. And I cannot imagine what it would be like if I were to go to Japan and I'd say, well, I was a teacher, and we're like, well, good for you, but here you could be a shopkeeper. Like I don't even think I could do that over there. And so what does that do for us? What can we do for our learner? And it's building that professional identity, helping them develop their skill sets, whether it's a resume building, yes, that can help, but it's also an area where they can develop maybe a website, a personal website that they could curate their professional licenses and certifications and experiences rather than having it in some type of written portfolio so that when they do have an interview, they have something that they can reference to a possible employer or network provider. So those are some of the areas to consider in terms of um, how we can address those barriers. And Marian, thank you so much. She posted in the chat, she saved me, she put that BICS, the basic interpersonal communicative skills, and CALP is a cognitive academic language proficiency. So basic skills and academic skills. Thank you so much, Marian. I really appreciate that. Um, Stephanie says, when will we get a chance to talk about our students? You could talk about them now. Tell me a little bit about what you are going through with your learners. You want to unmute, Stephanie?
Hi.
Hi.
So I have a couple of students from Afghanistan, and one student was a teacher back in Afghanistan for 12 years. And when we first met about a year ago, she had applied for a job to work at McDonald's, and she was
Mhm.
really upset because they didn't call her. And I was like, what is going on here? Why are you applying for these jobs? And it took about 6 months, but she finally got a job in an educational institution working at a daycare, and they're
Mhm.
helping her. We got her degree recognized, and then we got her a job, but it's really low paying. But the job is helping her get certifications through UNR that will hopefully help her increase her pay over time.
Okay.
And so I have another student now that had 31 years experience as a teacher, and she's now working in a microchip factory in Reno. And she actually dropped out of my class, and I've been trying to get a hold of her, but I can't seem to get a hold of her. So I'm just wondering, like, what I can do to help these students who are burned out and obviously have a ton of brain waste. And, they work like 12-hour shifts, and then they are required to come to English classes 3 hours a night, and it's just too much.
I would, I was looking up right now a link as you were sharing, Stephanie. Thank you so much for sharing about your two learners. Your Afghanistan learner, they pose an additional barrier because of where they come from. And I don't know if that individual has access to their documents. You said that you had them evaluated, is that correct?
I did for, yeah, the first student.
Mhm.
The second student, I'm just, not finding a way that I can really help her because she doesn't even have the time to be like thinking about or looking for a new job because of the job she's in.
Right. And that is one of the considerations. Going back to that first student, I put a link in the chat. And this is a program that is provided by World Education Services, and they cater to individuals who come from countries that are either going through a war or they do not, it's defined. They're pretty much, they serve immigrants and refugees that have difficulty obtaining their documents from their country. And so World Education Services has a partnership with these countries that they help gather those resources for them. But it's only a listing of about 8 countries. I know it's Venezuela, Afghanistan's in there, and I don't remember the others. But so that could be something to consider moving forward with any other individuals like your first student that you might refer them to so that it doesn't fall on you on having to navigate that path because that organization already exists that they can provide that additional support. In terms of the employment aspects, that is the difficulty. It's how do you ensure that they have the skill sets needed to find not just the job, but the occupation that is aligned to their career path. And it really does take more than this conversation here right now to know because I would need a lot more information. I don't know much about this individual, and I can't even say that I'm an expert in guiding, but I could definitely provide some questions that you might want to consider to help navigate that career path. And then for your second learner that you shared, the same goes in that aspect in terms of what resources exist. So I would love to have a more in-depth conversation to see if there's any resources that exist that I could possibly share with you so you could push forward with your learners. So I appreciate that you had shared that. Nancy, I see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, I'm glad to hear that you mentioned UNR because UNR has a special project, a funded project specifically for education and working with people, for, licensure. Especially people that are working in, other positions within the K-12 system. And I'm looking to try to find the name of that, and I'm struggling, but I will find it before we finish today and put it in the chat.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
A-
you both.
And I will share some other partner agencies that exist. Nevada's in a really good spot, and I'll tell you a little bit about ONA in a little bit. So thank you for that question. Um, for time, I want to move on and then allow for additional questions in a bit. Let's see, I do want to go into the ITP planning and what we could share with our learners. And when our learners come in through our doors, and once we identify that they are internationally trained professionals, it's really important to get that background knowledge of where they come from, what access to documents they have, what is it that they want to do, because often what they want to do is different from what they think they can do and what they were educated to do. And so you need to determine those goals so that they can make that informed decision on what path they want to take. And it is an in-depth conversation, like I mentioned before. The second thing is once they know, because oftentimes, like if they have a career in law, in medicine, those are really difficult industries to be able to realign with because they're just ever changing. Laws are very different in every state, much less the United States as a whole, compared to other countries. So you would pretty much have to advise that individual to start all over in terms of their master's degree, not their bachelor's degree, but start over with their master's degree and either pursue their JD, their jurisprudence, or maybe get their master's in another field. For example, if it's in medicine, being aware of that career path. I had a student who was Vietnamese and she was a doctor in her country, but then it turned out that upon evaluation of her credentials, that she was called a doctor and she had finished high school with a specialization in health, but in her city, she was considered a doctor. And so those are the kinds of things that can be very detrimental to our learners. And we need to ensure that we have a defined career pathway for them so that if option A doesn't work, what are some of the vignettes that can lead them to the same type of career, not necessarily the occupation, but within the same industry. And then that number two is talking about assessing what you have and identifying what you need. Do they have access to their documents? Do they have the financial capital to move forward with whatever it is they want to do? If they want to re-engage with education, say they are a teacher, if they need English, then that's going to be the focus right now is taking those English classes. If they don't have access to their documents, well, then again, they continue with the English. Do they have a legal work status? If not, how do they obtain that? And so depending on all the areas that you can assess, that will be your starting point that will lead you to the end. I know it sounds very basic, but it is something that we really need to look at for our ITP individuals. And then looking at the end in mind, if an individual wants to be a teacher, but right now they're focusing on raising their young children, maybe going back to the university is not the appropriate decision right now. Again, it's up to the individual, but they need to consider all the pieces. If they have the English, check. Okay, do they need to take an English proficiency test for the university? Yes. Are they prepared for it? No. Then that's what they need to study for. Do they have the money to pay for university classes? No. Well, then they need to build that up. And in the meantime, maybe you can help them with a job that is not at high school equivalency level, but it does take into account their background. So they could be maybe a manager at a department store or something, or maybe an entry-level job within their industry to get them started as a job, and then later they move into their career. And then, of course, identifying those resources that they need so that they can determine whether or not they're going to evaluate their credentials. Having their credential evaluation is like getting a driver's license. It is valid for a certain period of time. After it expires, you have to renew it. So it doesn't make sense to have it translated or evaluated if the individual is not going to use it at this time. If they're going to be focusing on their education, then they can hold off on the translation and evaluation for later. If they're looking for a job, something to pay the bills now so that they can focus maybe on an IET, then they want to translate their credentials so that the employer can see that it's written in English and they can understand, and then they can be able to obtain employment for a temporary basis. Again, teaching our learners how to advocate for themselves is important because employers would not know how to read a translated credential document. Now, an evaluated credential is different. That is when they want to go back to college or the university, and you need to look at what college or university that individual wants to attend, because every institution will have their own approved list of accredited credential evaluators that they will allow. And sometimes that institution will do it on behalf of the learner, and then of course they'll charge them. Sometimes they'll ask the learner to go ahead and do that on their own. So you really need to go back and see where is it that they want to work or go to school, and then see what the requirements are before you engage in a credential evaluation or translation process. Then once you're aware of all the pieces, then that's when you can either continue on your path for adult education, whether it's a workforce training or an ITP specialized class, or going to a college class, or maybe some workforce training or employment. And then of course they need to be aware of maintaining their documents in good standing thereafter. I'm going to move forward to the resources that I want to share in the last few minutes that we have remaining. So the first thing I want to share is that we have some career pathway guidance that is available through Upwardly Global. They focus on they offer lots of support, but one of the items that they do is they develop licensing guides in different types of industries. And they are by state. I did look up Nevada, and Nevada doesn't have any licensing guides for their own state. If you'd like to develop one, you're more than welcome to. And however, you can see from the other states that are demonstrated. I think the one I'm sharing on the screen on the left-hand side is from California. At least it gives you a starting point of what questions to ask your learners, what resources you could tap into, especially if they're national resources. And then you could ask the state office, not your adult education state office, but the state office that applies to the medical field or the education field, because since it's in that licensing guide, it'll guide you as to the questions that you need to ask. So then on the right-hand side, you have World Education Services, and they have career pathway guides. And these are also, these are national guides. These are not by state, but again, it gives you a global perspective of considerations in terms of resources to access, barriers that might exist, support systems that are available for your learner. And I see that Josie has posted them in the chat. Thank you so much, Josie. And I see that Nancy posted, oh, you found it, Nancy. Yes, it's that Paraprofessional Pathways Project. Thank you so much. And she said that they help with the individual on costs. So that's really good to know. I'm going to copy that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Now, on to the next page is about credential evaluations. And when we look at those credential evaluations, thank you, Josie, there are two. These are associations that serve as a hub for a collection of agencies. The first one is ACE. It's the Association of International Credential Evaluators. And what it is, and the other one is NACES, the National Association of Credential Evaluation Services. They both do the same, they have the same objective. What they do is they have their own internal system of vetting members. How you become a member depends on the agency. And these are accredited evaluators. They are national and international credential evaluators. Some of them offer translations, some of them offer only credential evaluations. And you would need to go into each site under the members tab to identify the individual services that each of the agencies provides. But this is definitely a place that I would strongly recommend for you to use with your ITP individuals, because many ITP individuals will think, well, I went to a notary public and they translated it for me, therefore it's valid, and it's not. Or they had their sister-in-law who knows English very well, they evaluated it and they translated it, and it has no value. And sometimes if you have a credential evaluation through an institution, let's say by a college university, it's only valid for that college or university. So again, you want to be able to know what is it that the learner wants to do at the end, and then start at the end. What institution or employer are they going to go to, and then work backwards. And then you can use one of these resources as a default to identify which type of organization you would use. Some require hard copy documents, some require documents straight from the issuing entity, some allow for online copies, some take 3 days and some take 6 weeks. And then the costs vary in between. The credential evaluation is valid for 5 years, some are good for 8 years. And you really have to do your homework before you advise the learner, not necessarily advise the learner, but inform the learner of the considerations of what to be aware of, because there's going to be lots of differences among the resources available there. And then we go on to the next resource available, and this is for instruction. And Josie, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. On the left-hand side, we have the World Education Services Degree Equivalency Tool. You can scan that, or you can click on the link. I'll share the PDF to you, and it's also posted in the chat. And so your learners oftentimes just need to know, where do I stand, more or less? And this degree equivalency tool is free. The participant only needs an email. You could try it out for yourself and see how it works. It asks you a few questions. And if the individual, you need to put, or you need to find the university where you attended. And if it's not there, you need to find one that is closely resembles your institution, if it's available. And then it will give you an output of what their academic equivalent might be. And this is not valid for anything other than informative guidance to let the learner know more or less where they stand. And it's a really good place to start, especially for, in countries where they call it one thing, but here in the US, it's not the equivalent. So it's always a good place to start. On the right-hand side, there is a blog about understanding the US education system, and it's just some information in terms of what any individual new to the US would need to consider. And so it's a good read for you to consider. On the next slide, we have some additional resources on instruction, and this is USA Hello. This is a wonderful immigrant-friendly site. It offers a variety of topics, but mainly it's a really good primer for individuals who are new to the US. It's available in multiple languages, especially it serves now individuals from Afghanistan, and I forgot the other country, but it has several languages. So it's a really great primer for you to consider and utilize in your classrooms. And it's also good for individuals who serve in the capacity of career navigator. And then the next resource is on support services. Again, talking about in terms of navigation, career support, success coach. On the left-hand side, you have a resource. This is from World Education, not this is known as World Ed, not the other, not World Education Services. Many people get them confused, but in World Ed, they have a course called Finding True North, the role of a career navigator, my apologies. And it's a series of workshops that helps the navigator better just equip them with the tools they need to facilitate the guidance for their learners. And this is great for any type of learner, not just ITPs, but it's critical in terms of how to do motivational interviewing and asking open-ended questions and how to be supportive. And so it's just a really great resource. On the right-hand side, we have the Governor's Office for New Americans, and I'm so excited that Nevada has an ONA. And I know that Nancy had mentioned it earlier. You are so lucky that you have an ONA, because if you are looking for partners, that's your partner right there. All you need to do is reach out to that office, let them know that you want to network with them, and they already have the resource hub to other partners, and whether it's industry or anything else. And it's just a click of a button, a click of a mouse that you need to do is reach out to them, and they work with World Education Services directly. And so they are in the know of the latest and greatest resources and up and coming legislation. Nevada has secured funding for ITP individuals. So at the state level, you have lots of support. Of course, you have federal support, but many states do not have that state support. So take advantage of your Office of New Americans state network so that you could support your ITP learners. And with that, I'm going to ask you, based on what was shared today, is there one thing that you're planning on exploring further or maybe using? Go ahead and post that in the chat. What's one thing you plan on using or exploring further? Thank you, Josie, for posting it in the chat. And with that, I'm going to thank you so much for joining us today and this conversation. Nancy, I see your hand is up. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I must have left it up a long time ago. Sorry about that. Thank you.
You're good. You're good. Okay, so I see that Margaret says, putting together the links and resources into a pamphlet for my students at our ITP. Yay! World Ed, finding the true north, says Valerie. And then Gail says, exploring all these resources. And so Josie has put, is that an evaluation, Josie? I believe that's an evaluation link. Please let me know what we meaning I, can do differently, do better. I like to hear from you, and please post your responses in that evaluation. So fill that out. Like to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer. And Marianne or Nancy, any final words before we log off? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day.